everything he had postponed, and everything he was afraid to let go of. That night, Daniel made a decision. He would clean the room, not because he believed that throwing away old objects would magically make money appear. He knew better than that. He simply wanted to see what would happen if he stopped, allowing the past to occupy so much physical space in his present. The next Saturday, the entire family gathered outside the storage room. Emily brought boxes, Noah brought trash bags, Lily brought labels and markers. Daniel stood in the doorway. "Okay," he said. "Today we change this room." They started with 3 categories: keep, give away, and let go. The first box was easy. Old photographs went into the keep pile. Daniel carefully opened them one by one. There were pictures of his parents when they were young, pictures of family vacations, birthdays, school events, and ordinary moments that had become precious with time. Then they found an old coat. Daniel held it against himself. It had belonged to his father. For several minutes he said nothing. Emily didn't pressure him. Finally, Daniel smiled. "Dad wore this every winter," he said. Lily asked, "Are you keeping it?" Daniel looked at the coat again. "No," he said quietly. "I'm going to give it to someone who needs it." It was one of the hardest decisions he had made in years. He didn't throw it away. He didn't disrespect his father's memory. He simply accepted that loving someone did not mean keeping every object they had ever touched. That realization changed the way he approached the rest of the room. The family discovered dozens of things they had forgotten about. There were 3 broken coffee makers, 2 boxes of outdated computer cables, a collection of magazines from 15 years ago, shoes nobody wore, clothes that no longer fit, furniture that was too damaged to repair, old paperwork that had no purpose, decorations that had been packed away because nobody liked them anymore. Every object seemed to ask the same question: are you keeping me because you need me, or because you're afraid to let me go? By the end of the first day, they had filled 7 large boxes. The room looked different, but there was still one corner they had not touched. It was the darkest corner of the room. An old wooden cabinet stood there, covered with dust. Daniel knew what was inside. His father had kept financial papers in that cabinet. Years ago, Daniel had opened it once and discovered unpaid bills, old bank statements, business documents, and letters connected to his father's financial struggles. Daniel had never opened it again, but now he knew he had to. He pulled the cabinet door. It resisted. He pulled harder. The door finally opened with a loud crack. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Daniel began sorting them. Some were meaningless. Some were old records. But then he found a handwritten notebook. It belonged to his father. Daniel sat on the floor and opened it. The first pages contained notes about expenses, business ideas, and plans. Then he found a sentence that stopped him. A person can become so focused on protecting what they have lost that they stop building what they still have. Daniel read it twice. Then again, his father's words felt strangely relevant. He turned the page. There were notes about a small business his father had wanted to start. A repair company. He had written down ideas, prices, possible customers, and even a rough plan. But the business had never happened. Daniel knew why. His father had spent years worrying that it would fail. He had kept the plan inside that cabinet, and eventually the dream had become another forgotten object. Daniel closed the notebook. He suddenly understood something about himself. He had inherited more than his father's possessions. He had inherited some of his fears. For years, Daniel had avoided taking risks because he had watched his father struggle. He had convinced himself that security meant never reaching too far. But perhaps he had confused safety with staying stuck. He looked around the room. The boxes were everywhere. But for the first time, the room didn't feel heavy. It felt unfinished. And that was different. Over the next several days, Daniel and his family continued cleaning. They opened the windows. They let sunlight into the room. They wiped the shelves. They repaired what could be repaired. They donated useful items. They recycled what was no longer usable. They created an organized space for the things they genuinely wanted to keep. Daniel placed his father's photographs in a clean wooden box. He kept the notebook, but he did not keep the broken furniture, damaged electronics, or dozens of objects that had simply been sitting there because nobody had been brave enough to make a decision. When they finished, the forgotten corner was completely empty. There was nothing dramatic about it. No lightning, no sudden miracle. Just an empty corner, sunlight on the floor, and a family standing quietly in the doorway. Lily smiled. "It looks bigger." Emily laughed. "It feels bigger." Daniel nodded. "Maybe because it is." That evening, Daniel returned to his proposal. This time he did something different. He took a sheet of paper and wrote down everything he had learned from his father's notebook. He wrote about taking action. He wrote about planning. He wrote about serving customers. He wrote about accepting uncertainty, and then he began writing his own proposal. He worked for 3 hours without stopping. For the first time in months, his thoughts felt organized. The following 2 weeks were difficult. Daniel had to prepare financial projections, create presentations, answer questions, and practice speaking. There were moments when he wanted to quit, but every time he felt overwhelmed, he remembered the storage room, not because he believed the room had magical powers, because cleaning it had taught him something practical. You cannot move confidently toward the future while constantly turning around to protect the past. The day of the presentation arrived. Daniel stood in front of Marcus and 4 other executives. His hands were shaking. He took a breath. Then he began. He explained his plan clearly. He talked about growth, customer relationships, efficiency, and long-term strategy. When they asked difficult questions, he didn't panic. He answered honestly. 2 days later, Marcus called. "I want you to lead the division." Daniel sat silently. "How soon?" he asked. Marcus laughed. "As soon as you can start." Daniel thanked him. Then he hung up. He walked into the kitchen. Emily was preparing dinner. Daniel simply said, "I got it." Emily dropped the spoon she was holding. "What?" "I got the position." She stared at him. Then she hugged him. Noah and Lily ran into the kitchen. "What happened?" Daniel smiled. "Dad got a new job?" The children cheered. But Daniel knew something important. The new position wasn't created by an empty room. The opportunity had come because of years of experience, relationships, hard work, and preparation. The difference was that Daniel was finally mentally prepared to recognize it and act on it. The storage room had not created wealth. It had created space, and space had created clarity. Over the next year, the family's financial situation changed. Dramatically, Daniel's income increased. But more importantly, his habits changed. He stopped buying things simply because they were on sale. Emily created a saving system. They paid down debts. They repaired the parts of the house they had been ignoring. They created an emergency fund. They started planning instead of reacting. And every 3 months, they walked through the house together. They asked one simple question. Is this still serving the life we want to build? If the answer was no, they let it go. The transformation wasn't only financial. Noah became more responsible with his belongings. Lily began keeping her room organized. Emily felt less anxious. Daniel became more confident. The house seemed brighter. Not because they had changed the paint or bought expensive furniture, but because there was less chaos everywhere. One evening, almost a year after the storage room had been cleaned, Daniel opened the door again. The room was now a small family workspace. There was a desk near the window. A bookshelf stood against the wall. Lily had a small art table. Noah kept his school projects there, and on one shelf sat the wooden box containing Daniel's father's photographs. Beside it was the old notebook. Daniel opened the notebook one last time. He looked at the sentence he had remembered for an entire year. Then he added his own sentence underneath it. The past deserves respect, but the future deserves room. He closed the notebook. Outside the window, the evening sun filled the room. Emily walked in. "You're thinking about him again?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Yeah." "Do you miss him?" "Every day." She looked at the photographs. "Do you regret giving away his things?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I finally realized I don't need his things to keep his memory." Emily smiled. "That sounds like something he would have wanted." Daniel looked around the room. Years earlier, this space had been filled with objects that nobody used and memories nobody knew how to release. Now it was filled with the sounds of his children laughing, pages turning, pencils moving, and plans being made. That was the real transformation. Not money, not luck, not magic. Movement. The family had stopped living around the things they were afraid to lose and started building around the things they wanted to become. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson behind the old belief that clearing a forgotten corner can invite new abundance. Sometimes abundance does not arrive as a check in the mail. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. Sometimes it arrives as courage. Sometimes it arrives as an opportunity you finally recognize because your mind is no longer buried under yesterday. And sometimes the first sign of a new chapter is simply an empty space where something old used to be. So tonight, before you go to sleep, look around your home. Don't search for a magical object. Search for something you have been avoiding. Maybe it's a closet filled with clothes you haven't worn in years. Maybe it's a drawer filled with papers you never look at. Maybe it's a broken piece of furniture you keep promising to repair. Maybe it's a box filled with things from a chapter of your life that has already ended. Don't throw away anything valuable or meaningful. simply because someone tells you it is bad luck. Instead, ask yourself 3 questions. Do I still use this? Does this support the life I am living today? Or am I keeping it because I'm afraid of what letting go might mean? If something still matters, keep it. If something can help another person, donate it. If something is broken beyond use, dispose of it responsibly. And if something carries painful memories, give yourself permission to decide whether you need the object or only the lesson it represents. You don't have to clear your entire house in one day. Start with 1 drawer, 1 shelf, 1 forgotten box, 1 corner. As you clean, don't think, I'm throwing things away. Think, I'm making room. Room for better habits. Room for new ideas. Room for peace. Room for opportunity. Room for the future. That is what Daniel learned. And perhaps that is what we all eventually discover. A crowded home doesn't necessarily mean a poor life. An empty room doesn't automatically create wealth. But when you clear the physical clutter around you, you may begin noticing the mental clutter inside you. And when the mind becomes clearer, decisions become clearer. When decisions become clearer, actions become stronger. When actions become stronger, your life can begin to change. So if there is a forgotten corner in your home that has been waiting for years, don't ignore it tonight. Open the door, turn on the light, take a deep breath, and begin. Because the next chapter of your life may not need more space than you think. It may only need the space you have been refusing to make. And remember one final thing. You are not throwing away your past. You are making room for your future. That is where Daniel found his new beginning. And perhaps your new beginning is waiting in a forgotten corner too.